Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of the Rider Weight Summit, the bigger picture, which has got even bigger. And I'm sure tonight it will get even bigger. So I'm Caroline Lindsay, president of the PSFA, and I'm a PhD student as well as a second year of veterinary physiotherapist and certified saddle fitter and a clinical educator. And my topic is rider performance pain, strength and conditioning. So I'm delighted to welcome back Emma, Bradley and Maria. Emma is she was a young rider who later in life put on a lot of weight and then successfully lost it again. And Maria and Bradley are our super duper saddle designers. And Maria has the Ergo X2 brand in Sweden, and Bradley is almost launching his Ipotane brand in the UK. So yes, he's into lots of nerdy subjects at the moment as he goes through the design process. So if you need to get in touch with the PSFA, it's info@thepsfa.org, and give us a like on Facebook on our public page. I'll send you an email about all that. Then all you have to do is click on links. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Bradley Whale to pick up from where he finished off last time.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about saddles, and we talked about the rider weight issue. So where previously we talked about the mainly focused on the rider, here we're going to be talking about the influence of weight upon the aspect of the saddle design, the materials which we place within saddles, so on and so forth. So we're going to now actually look at the material elements of the rider weight issue, rather than just purely focusing on rider as a rider weight issue. We're now going to start bringing it into more of basically a discussion on saddles and the actual aspect, the materials and mechanics of saddlery. So the idea today is that what we're going to be talking about is saddle physics, load application, force distribution, the physics behind panels, and rider physics. And obviously the rider physics is going to start getting really complicated, because that really leans into what Maria kind of really is very, very knowledgeable about in terms of core stability of the rider, getting them balanced, so on and so forth. So that is very much kind of Emma's and Maria's kind of realm, which is fantastic. So as we kind of ended last time, kind of talking about the rider, and we ended up talking on quite a subject which was pulled in quite a lot of interest. Now we're going to actually kind of take a step away from that and go, right, let's look at saddle manufacturing. So the fundamental thing which we need to understand is that there are no manufacturing standards within the industry, and that is quite a big thing. There's no universal laws or regulation within the industry for safety requirements or kind of minimum impact kind of protection for horse or rider. So what happens is we've got an industry which is kind of predominantly built on subjectivity, and that creates a problem in some regards of kind of the theory of expert and expertise. So when you're dealing with saddles and saddle companies and various things like that, you must remember that because there is no universal regulation by the industry, that creates difficulty for you as a saddle fitter, because what may be designed at the very basic level from a company may be a saddle which is designed to fit, say, a high performance horse. It may not be appropriate for a horse which is more of a happy hacker. And therefore, because it has different materials and standards and expectations placed upon the saddle, for a high performance horse. So this is where we've really got to kind of understand is that not all saddles are the same, but all saddles must obey the laws of physics. Okay, so even though we don't have standards, there are certain laws of physics which every product has to kind of obey by, and you can't really break those rules. Trust me, I've tried. So first things to understand is, especially in relevance to rider weight, is what we call spreading the load. So in this kind of context, when we say load, we are also meaning weight. Weight and load are slightly different they have slightly different definitions, but essentially in this kind of understanding, in this scenario, load and weight are what we kind of synonymous. So here we're talking, and in order to explain all of this, I've had to take a lot of pictures and various things from things like civil engineering and structural engineering kind of textbooks and so on and so forth. So you may look at these and kind of go, oh, look, that says about soil, and that says about kind of wood or kind of structure and footings and to build houses. That's because there is nothing ever written in terms of the engineering expectations or the engineering forces which are applied to horses. I have no willingness to write that book. It's going to be a big, complicated book, but I'm not willing to do that just yet. Maybe when I'm old and decrepit, I'll quite happily do that. But here, what I want you to kind of really take away from these pictures is the understanding that when a load is applied to a flat surface, the force is spread at roughly a 45-degree angle. Okay. Now, we are saying roughly because different densities of materials will spread the load at different angles. Okay, so this is where it comes into the argument of, or the understanding of, stiffness of materials. A stiffer material will spread the load at a wider angle because of the kind of stiffness of the material, because it's rigid. A more flexible material will not spread the load at a 45-degree angle. It will kind of reduce it slightly. But you are being relatively semantic in terms of the angles of change. It is generally speaking a 45-degree angle from the point of a flat surface or the point of contact of the applied load. Okay, so what we're talking about here is quite heavy. Okay, and it's going to get heavy. So if you kind of don't worry about not absorbing it straight away, this is going to get quite deep, and I'm trying to keep it as relatively light as possible. So please be warned. Here again, we're going into and trying to understand how load is spread. Now, the diagram on the left shows that, again, it's a load which is applied to a flat surface. As you can see at the top where the green load is applied, there's a lovely little bell curve where it says undisturbed sphere. Okay, that is roughly, this is all to do with soil, by the way. This is how soil works and kind of how the percentages spread. But you can see as that kind of curve, this is where it becomes a little bit truer from the site of impact, because you have that kind of slight curve, and you can see how 80% of the load, 60% of the load, 30% of the load, 10% of the load is distributed. So if the load is 100 kilos, then 80 kilos is roughly, or 80% of that is located very close to the impact or the site of contact. 60%, it goes a little bit further down, 30% even further down, and 10% even further down. So you can see how the load decreases the deeper or the lower you go. Okay, so this is all on the assumption, and this is all from civil engineering, that a flat surface, okay, now with curved surfaces, much there is like on a horse's back, it gets slightly more complicated because of a smaller contact area. Okay, so as you can see on every picture here, you can see where the forces and the load is spread from either point of where the load is contacted with the surface. Okay, So when you start applying a load on a flat surface and a curved surface, okay, it changes the dynamic quite a lot. So on the image on the left hand side, you can see the big triangle in blue. As it hits the flat surface on red, it again further spreads out on a 45-degree angle, making a larger triangle. Pretty simple to understand. We got it. Now, the image in the center, where you have an inverted triangle, you have a small point of contact. And what you get is, from that small point of contact, you have another triangle which is coming away from it. So it mirrors the triangle above because of the contact surface area. Okay, so a smaller contact surface area will actually increase the pressure. Okay, so that is on a very simplistic level in terms of a flat surface. Now, when we apply a curved surfaces, things get complicated. Okay, so in order to understand how curved surfaces behave under load application, okay, so this is a little bit of a exercise. As you can see, transverse plane, and you have a slight convex curve, and you put a load from the top down. What do you think is going to happen to the green balls on either side with the load which comes down vertically? And equally on the sagittal plane, okay, so the transverse plane is mimicking you standing at the horse's bottom and looking to the horse's head. The sagittal plane is you mimicking looking at the horse from the side. So again, if you look at the horse from the side and you put a load into the horse's back, what's going to happen to the two green balls? Okay, so I just want you to think what's going to happen when I apply a load to those shapes and curves. Okay, so what happens is that in the transverse plane, as you apply a load, the balls will move outwards. Okay, so it starts to spread, it starts to go wider. Now, if you're in the sagittal plane and you put a load in the center, the two green balls will go in. Now, this is very important to understand. So you now have two different shapes, one convex and one concave. And when you apply a similar load, they are now going to be behaving very differently. You've got one which is going to expand and go wider, and you've got the other one which is then going to close. Now, why is this important? Is because horses' backs are both convex and concave. That's obvious now. Okay, so you can see on the image on the right hand side, you've got a horse with a very dipped back, okay, very poor condition, and then through training it has come up and it has completely changed its curvature. So you all of a sudden, those two curves, the convex and the concave curve, have changed. Now also, these curves, these changes, these convex and concave curves change when they're exercised. They change in thoracic sling theory or thoracic balloon theory. So those are the short-term changes. We also have long-term changes, which is to consider seasonal change as well. So as a training regime. So all of a sudden, this is now starting to make your life as a saddle fitter really, really complex, because you're starting to look at these various caves and you're starting to understand that if you apply load, then the different curves are going to move in different ways, in different shapes and forms. So all of a sudden, you're starting to look at this and go, well, how do we solve it? And how do we solve this with the rider weight issue? Because obviously when you're applying load, the saddle and the horse is going to change shape. Now, this is where it gets fun, okay? So the saddle shape is obviously both convex and concave. It can stretch and compress. Okay, so we understand that, but it does it in different ways and it does it in different values. Much the same. So I'm trying to present to you, and I'm really trying to hammer this home in terms of how the the convex and the concave shapes work. So look at a concave shape and look at a convex shape. You know, they can be kind of similar to things like bridges, you know, cables under tension, you know, both under compression and tension, and the various forces which are applied. With the bridge on the left, if you remove blocks A on either side, then the bridge will collapse and go wider. Okay, so that's the way a horse's back will move, is that when you put load, the rib cage and the thoracic spine will kind of move laterally. And the same thing with the suspension bridge expression, is that when you put a bridge, the suspension cables under load, the two pillars are going to come in. Okay, so those pillars mimic essentially the horse's legs. So you'll get this dipping. Now, obviously, with the horse engaging the muscles and various things like that, that tension or that load which is going down, if the horse isn't trained appropriately, the horse is going to collapse further. If the horse has a lot of musculature, it will hold and push against the weight of the rider. Okay, yeah. So, and this is where it gets another layer of complication, is circumference. The reason being I'm saying about circumference is because this has a big play when you're starting to look at how you fit saddles. Because the circumference of a horse's rib cage is not uniform. And it is not, I'm going to take that off a minute. There you go. So the circumference of a horse's rib cage is not uniform. It can be various different shapes, from oval, pyriform, circular, and elliptical. So all of a sudden, that's going to cause difficulty in different loading pressures. You know, you imagine and you compare trying to fit a saddle on a circular horse than it is compared to a pyriform or an oval or an elliptical force. They're different curves, they're different shapes. Now, these examples are taken as cut throughs in the transverse plane. Now, the image on the right shows how much. Okay, so the image on the right, the dotted circle shows a rib cage or a circle as a set circumference. And the one which is now, or black, the solid black ovoid, or elliptical, horizontal elliptical, is the same circumference, but now a completely different shape. So those two circles, or those two shapes, they are exactly the same circumference. And when we say circumference, that is the measurement all the way around the outside. Okay? Now, that can have a huge effect in terms of saddle fitting. And you can have horses which vary their ribcage shape quite dramatically from session to session to season to season. So, why is this important? As I said, saddle load and distribution with no panel. So it should be common practice when you go and fit a saddle is you should go and get a tree and you should put it onto the horse and onto the horse's back. Now, if you've got a tree which is of a set curvature, and all saddles are set to a certain curve, I mean transverse curve, not sagittal curve, you can get pressure points on, especially on a wide horse, you can get pressure points on either end. And then with a narrow horse, and you still have that curve of the saddle tree, you're now going to have a wobble. So this is where you start getting saddles which are both they can be the same tree but on different horses. Wide horses, they can pinch, and they can pinch right onto that kind of rib angle. And then on a narrow horse, they're going to wobble round. So you're then going to have to flock up the panel quite a lot to compensate. Okay. Now, this is one thing which I really want you to understand is load distribution is not always even. Okay. So what I'm just going to quickly do, no, that is the wrong way. I won't be able to do it, but I'll have to do it when I have the camera on and you can see me. when you apply a load vertically on a curve, the load, if you apply it from a vertical standpoint, okay, and not perpendicular to the curve. So if you're doing vertical, as you go around the curve, you get something, the force is not always going to be even, okay? So the force which is applied in the center of the curve will spread along the entirety of the curve. If you apply the same force on the edge of a curve, you won't get the same distribution of force at the other end of the curve, if you see what I mean. So if you apply a force in the center here, where the blue angle is, blue arrow is, and then that way the force will spread evenly left and right. Absolutely makes sense. Now, if you apply a load to the side here, you will not get the same load or even distribution of load over the entirety of the curve. Okay, you get something called deflection, which we will talk about later. Sorry. Now, the same thing happens in both curves, so both convex and concave curves. So even on a kind of inverted to sagittal plane curve, you will have a central load going down the center, and it will distribute load. And what will happen is like we said earlier, the two green balls will come into the middle. But if you try and put the load on the outside and more onto the edge, you will get this kind of deflection. And this is where a deflection is defined as a change in a moving object's velocity. Okay, so therefore its trajectory as a consequence of contact with a surface. So if the load is not perpendicular, okay, then you get deflection. And deflection then reduces the impact. Again, in theory, very simple. In reality, really, really complex. Now, this is also has an impact upon the stiffness of the tree. If the tree is particularly stiff, then you don't get as much deflection. If your tree is relatively soft and pliable, then you get a greater degree of deflection. And deflection is also a way of reducing the impact on the horse's back. Okay, so when we pick up trees and saddles and we put the cantles against our chest and we pull them tight towards us, and you get a little bit of flex and curve, the flex and curve of the tree in some regards is a good thing, but it can also be a problem. Okay, and it's understanding the idea, the thinking behind the design of the product, because you can have a tree which is deliberately designed to flex in the middle to allow movement and so on and so forth. But the problem is if that allows movement at that point, then it increases the pressure at that point. Now, equally, if you had a really hard tree and a really stiff tree which didn't flex and move, then you get no mobility in it. So therefore, the product has to be much more accurate to fit the horse. When it's a little bit softer, you can get away with not being as accurate in terms of the curvatures and so on and so forth. But if you have a stiff tree, then you have to be very, very accurate, because when that horse changes and grows and everything like that, that is where you will start getting pinch points. You will start getting adverse or excessive contact, which means that the materials will not be able to cope with that excessive load. Okay, because in saddles, you have a layering system of materials, from leather to foam to flock to leather to knit to a numner to so on and so forth, all designed individually to take a percentage of load and force. And if one of those things starts to overload and take too much, then the materials will break down. Okay, that is the whole premise of how things start failing, is because there's an overload of one particular material above another. Okay, so here we're starting to talk about contact area and pressure. Now, this is a picture which we've all seen before. Okay, you know how a saddle should fit, whether it's bridging, rocking, twisting, so on and so forth. The difficulty is contact area has a major influence on pressure. However, pressure cannot influence surface area or contact area. This is why me banging on earlier and talking about the shape of the tree and why the shape of the tree and how the tree works and the curves and everything like that is really, really important to understand, and really important to understand how it can be modified. Okay, so when you're looking at contact area, okay, we're wanting a lovely broad area of contact. Okay, the difficulty is when you apply it to a static horse compared to a dynamically moving horse. The contact area on a dynamically moving horse will reduce. It just will, because you have a 4-time beat, a 2-time beat, a 3-time beat. There is always going to be an area of the contact zone which is going to have reduced pressure or reduced contact. Okay, so this is really important to understand, that how do you help in some regards. Now, I know this as a designer and as somebody who goes out and fits saddles and makes their own and so on and so forth. There is a big push at the moment to understand, to try and make the channel width as wide as possible. Oh God, I've been asked to make a channel width 8 centimeters wide. Now, anybody in old numbers essentially knows that's like 3 to 3 and a bit inches wide. That's quite wide. That is huge. And I've had to very politely explain to them that if you make a channel wider, yes, you are making the spine, giving the spine space. Okay, we all love the idea of giving spine space, but the problem is that a tree is generally, you know, let's just say 30 centimeters wide at its widest point. Now, if you keep making the channel essentially 8 centimeters wide all the way through, you've just suddenly lost a fair proportion of the contact area, because you've got to remember is that if your tree is not in contact with the entirety of the panel, then you inadvertently create bridge.
Yeah. So I'll fill in for you here. I'm pointing to the area that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that you know, you have these bars, and they are on the horse.
Yeah.
And you cannot move the panels outside them. That's what he's saying. So this is the area that you are.
Exactly, that's the area which I'm talking about, because there has been a movement towards producing saddles with wider and wider channels, which now start missing the bars.
Yeah.
And that creates problems, because you're actually inadvertently developing a saddle which deliberately bridges. So, and the thing is, as we said, because of the curvature of the horse, we know that as you go further away from the curve, the pressure decreases anyway. So you've got a problem here, and you've got this kind of counteracting going on, because it also means, because as you go round the curve, your contact area and your ability to apply vertical load reduces. Because as I said earlier, force has to be applied. If you're trying to spread the load evenly, it has to be applied perpendicular to the point of contact. Now, the same thing happens with a narrow channel. If you make the channel too narrow, you create other problems. You create restrictions for the spine. Okay. So let's actually look at panels. Okay. I want you to really look at a panel and the way it is designed purely from the aspect of weight distribution. Okay, I understand and I will explain the reasons why panels are designed certain ways, but from a singular perspective, if you look at a panel or an equestrian saddle panel and you look at the widest parts compared to the narrowest parts of a panel, it doesn't make sense, because the narrowest part of a panel is over T12, T13. Now, if you're locating the rider in that kind of real sweet spot, which is T12, T13, that makes no sense. You're positioning the rider into what is, the center of gravity, or just around the center of a horse's center of gravity. And all of a sudden you're putting the rider's weight over that area. It makes no sense to make the padding of that area really narrow. It makes more sense to make that padding as wide as possible. Okay, because that's where the load is being hit.
Can I show what you mean here? If
absolutely.
the line blows up my picture, let's see if we can see this. So this panel is actually much wider in this area instead of narrower. So this is, you can decide this as a designer, how wide, like he says, that you're going to do this area where you put the rider. So a lot of saddles will design, like he says, be really narrow where the rider actually is. And that makes no sense. So back to Brad.
So it makes no sense in terms of a rider weight issue. Okay, so if you're trying to correct somebody with a rider weight issue from an actual design perspective, this makes no sense. The reasons why we have a panel which is slightly narrower at this area is to actually make it more comfortable for the rider because of their leg. Because people don't want big and bulk underneath their thigh or into their adductors. So here you now have a design which is as a trade-off. You have a trade-off between, do I make a panel which is wider for better force impact and protecting the horse, or do I make a panel which is narrower, which is going to make the rider more comfortable? And a lot of the kind of modern way of saddlery is heading towards the comfort of the rider. And that's sometimes against what is actually required for the horse in terms of impact protection. Now, the other thing which is also really important to understand when you're making saddles and designing them and everything like that, the panel lengths do not increase or decrease at either end. What they actually do is they cut in the middle and they add the length in the middle. So in which case the thinnest part of the panel gets longer. Okay, and this is how they have designed saddles over the years. So saddles, if you go and measure from say a 15-inch saddle to an 18-inch saddle, what they actually do in terms of the manufacturing of the tree, and let's just say it's a standard wooden tree, they actually essentially make it longer in the middle. They don't add on extra at the back. They don't add on extra at the front. They literally and kind of make it longer in the middle bit. Okay, now that brings about another set of issues in terms of the mechanics, and I can go into that, but that's not relevant for this now. But it is really important to understand that when you're dealing with a longer panel or a longer tree, it doesn't necessarily mean more padding, okay? Because it actually means that the thinnest part of the panel is actually getting longer. So you're not making the thinnest part of the paddle wider or anything like that. Okay? So, panels into the horse's back impact. This is going to be fun. Now, this is where I need to explain to you that the aspect of compression. Okay, so in compression, the softest material will always compress first. Okay, no matter what weight you put on, always the softest material will compress first. Okay, now if you are putting a panel onto a horse's back or a saddle onto a horse's back, and it is filled with one material type, and I'm not trying to bash anything, or let's just say it's flocking. Okay, one material type. And there's complications with flocking. Actually, no, let's not do flocking, because that's really complicated, because you can talk about how hard you flock it and the different weave of the actual flock and the different material within the flock. Let's just say memory foam, okay, because that's a universal thing. We all understand it. So if you have memory foam all the way through the saddle panel, and then you start looking at, actually, is it worthwhile having layering different materials which will perform different compressions under different weight ratios? Okay, now this is what we call hybrid padding. Now that's something which is not really accepted within the British saddle manufacturing industry, because you talk to anybody in terms of British saddlery and you start saying, well, okay, well, why don't you mix flock? Why don't you mix different materials? And they're like, oh no, you just don't do it. And you sit there and go, well, why? What's your rationale? Because my rationale is that you want different materials to to perform at different ratios and different kind of stresses and strains. And you're saying, no, if you're going to flock it with, you know, white flock or brown flock or mixed flock or anything like that, or, you know, it's going to be a memory foam panel, you sit there and go, but one material, you're expecting it to perform a multiplicity of different forces and loads and everything like that. It makes no sense. So all of a sudden you start looking at the reasons why then we may have a flocked panel, but then the introduction of gel kind of supports for the horse's back, you know, gel numbners and kind of shimmed numbners, which has different kind of densities of materials and foam and so on and so forth. That is essentially doing what the saddle should do. The saddle should be performing those actions, not numbners, not all of the other stuff. But that comes down to the skill set of A, the saddle manufacturer, but also B, the saddle fitter. But, you know, we can talk about that for a very long time. But how do we reduce the impact on a horse's back? Well, you're essentially only limited to reducing impact by 4 things. And it's really simple. You can increase the material thickness, okay, i.e. just make the panel thicker or make the padding thicker. That's going to reduce the impact on the horse's back, or reduce the effect onto the horse's back. You increase the surface area. Now that's a contentious subject anyway at the best of times, but you know, you basically go beyond the 18th rib. And I am not advocating that. I am just saying that there's conversations which are being had about extending saddles beyond the 18th rib. The third option is that you improve the material science, i.e., you know, we do this hybridized kind of padding aspect with different materials and various things like that, so it becomes a little bit geeky. And then the fourth element is actually balance the bloody rider. You know, it's really simple. If you can balance the rider on top, then you immediately reduce the impact onto the horse's back. So but you are essentially, as a saddle fitter, dealing with those 4 elements. And as a saddle fitter, as a saddle designer, as a saddle manufacturer, those are your 4 tools in your toolbox, because that's all you have. And as I say, some of those are quite contentious. So we've talked about saddles. We very briefly. The problem is I'm trying to go through this relatively quickly because I want to have a conversation about it in terms of, because it's much more dynamic on how we communicate on how saddle design is. But I'm trying to go through the basics and trying to keep it relatively light. You know, I can go into this into a lot of detail. So
can we just add one detail to, because now you're into the rider. I'm thinking about panel and from a saddle fitter, a little bit about density, because we talked about wool. I've actually filled this panel. This panel is not just leather; it's also felt on the side, and I filled this one with different kind of wool in the middle, in the front, and in the rear. And when I compress it with my hands, I will feel that this softer wool that I put in, it's very squishy.
Yep.
People think that, oh, squishy is great. And then in the middle here, it's a little bit more firm. And the wool I have in the rear is really firm.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that what we found works the best on a horse, because you have the density of the muscle, you have the movement. The saddle also has to be like a ground force. So firm is better, for the simple reason that when the horse moves, it's going to come and push you up. And if you're still sinking, or if you're bouncing up and down on something that's soft, you're not going to be in a rhythm with the horse.
No. Well,
so,
this is you're absolutely right. Is the problem is then if you have a material and a density of material which is too soft,
yes,
then all of a sudden you get something called a rebound. Okay. Yeah. So all of a sudden now you've got this kind of almost double bounce thing going on. Now the problem with that is inadvertently that increases the impact and the trauma onto the area. So you've now got a situation where you need almost, in terms of saddle design and material science, you need a layer or something in order to, which has a deadening effect.
Yeah.
So it's kind of where you drop a weight and it just kind of hits and goes boom, and it just goes numb in some regards. You don't want this kind of elastic bounce. Now, the difficulty is that a panel, for example, is under at least two different types of forces. You've got a vertical load coming down from the rider, but then you also have a horizontal kind of load, or an AP load, coming from the shoulder blade. So you suddenly look and you've got your panel is now designed to try and distribute not only vertical, but also allow for the shoulder blade to move forward and backwards. So this is now counterintuitive. So the difficulty is like for a wooden tree is going to behave differently to a plastic tree, which is going to behave differently to a carbon fiber tree, which is going to behave differently to kind of any other type of material which is used in things. And I've had numerous times people turn around and go, well, plastic is bad, because I build a plastic tree. And you sit there and go, that's me like saying that all wooden trees are bad. But the problem is that there's many different types of wood. You know, we used to build wooden trees out of balsa wood, and now we use more kind of birch and various things like that, because the material, the actual tree, the actual wood has a different kind of lignin content. And I'm exceptionally nerdy, so I've had to look at all of this and stuff like that, because it has a lignin is the material which actually makes it harder. So all of a sudden I have to sit there and go, well, that's like saying all plastic trees are the same because they're all made of plastic, and they're not. You know, you've got polyethylene, polypropylene, you've got nylon, you've got TPU, you've got all these variations of materials, and they all behave differently. Like I've seen saddles which are designed as a rubber essentially, and you sit there and go, that's fantastic, that's a brilliant idea. But the problem is then it's not stiff enough, because it's not able to then distribute the load. So if you have a wooden tree which is fixed and rigid, and I've seen people literally showing that they can stand on a wooden tree, and you sit there and go, absolutely fantastic, that's brilliant. But if your horse, if that tree is made to, for example, let's just use this as an example. I've got bowls, right? So I've got a bowl here. That's the shape of my horse's back. Now, if I suddenly have a tree like another bowl, and I put it on top, then I've now got a rim where it now hits. It's not taking any load in the middle. Okay, so it's not like a ball and socket. It's not kind of lovely and connected all the way through. I've now got a rim, which is now going to create a problem. So that's where you start getting the rims and the issues along the rib line. So the thing is that having a saddle which has a degree of flex and movement, you then have to sit there and go, well, where do you have the degree of flex and movement? And this is where I say is that if you've got different curves within the horse, like concave and convex curves, the force cannot be applied evenly unless the material is of a certain stiffness. So it has to be a certain level of stiffness, but if it's too soft, you get point pressure. If it's too hard,
we come back to the old idea that the saddle has to create stability.
Yeah.
And people tend to forget that is the sole course, really, of using a saddle on the horse is to create stability.
Yeah. And this is the problem: is you sit there and it's the actual design of a product which you want to work with the horse, and the physics and the maths behind it is really quite complicated, because if it was just one singular curve, that's easy. Because the problem is you can predict how one singular curve is going to work. But the problem is when you apply one curve and the other curve, and you apply a load, they're behaving in two very different actions. Then you apply things like thoracic sling. You then apply things like muscle density. Now, as I say, like for example, right, this is a load of foam. Okay, so you've got a high density foam, you've got a soft memory foam, and another high density foam. Now, no matter what, okay, now I'm going to be a little bit risky here. Here we go. You got a little load going on it. Now, as soon as I do that, the high density foam is not compressing. The low density foam is all the time. Doesn't matter if I suddenly put a lighter load on it, it's always going to be compressing. So no matter what, if you have a material, a panel or any kind of material, which is harder than the horse's muscle, then the horse's muscle will always compress, which then goes back to what we understand in terms of sport physiology, is that you will then get compression of the arteries or compression of the capillaries, which will then cause whitening of the hair, which will then cause the next issue. And there's a whole like exercise physiology written about in terms of the optimum pressure to work with compression of capillaries. So the problem is that, and this is where you'll hear me always bang on about it, is that you sit there and go, well, if you don't know the density of the muscle, then how can a saddle fitter be expected to perform their job effectively and efficiently to protect the horse, to protect the rider, protect the industry, if it hasn't got a scale, or it hasn't got an ability to measure the density to then go, actually, no, that product is too hard. That's not a failing of the product. That's a failing of the industry in terms of trying to protect people and trying to protect horses. And you can do that, and there are people like Maria, who's really knowledgeable, can change all that, because a well-trained saddle fitter will turn around and press the muscles of the horse and then press the panel of the saddle and go, right, that's about the right density, that's about the right density. Okay, so they're close as they can be. But again, that's a skill. And that's learned over time, and that's learned over thousands of mistakes. Now we can be so much better as an industry, and this is where I'm quite passionate about, is that we can be really better and just kind of give people rough guidelines. I'm not saying being specific. I'm just going, give people guidelines, because you can do that.
Yeah, and I think we are, the industry has shot itself in the foot. I've had to try with trial and error, and you're normally left with a kind of stuffing that you can get your hands on, or that was put in the saddle originally, or you will have to start over. So for example, this kind of stuff that I'm having in my hand here, this is what's called silicone treated wool.
Yep.
And this is the absolute worst kind of shit you can put on a horse.
I think that's the stuff they put on Build-A-Bear, isn't it?
Yeah. So what happens when you compress this is it becomes nothing. It has absolutely no density, and people will think that, oh, that's lovely and soft. And it will just, let your weight go right through, and the bounce will go into the horse. And then you have also, this is quite a soft natural wool, but the hairs and the density of this is also too soft. So it means you have to create half a balloon of the panel to get any kind of density. And once you have that half a balloon of a panel, you're way above, you have instability, and the saddle is no longer close to the horse. So what we found is that the closer we get to actual felt material, and for some reason that is what the military used year after year after years, and horses that marched day in and day out, was still felt material. So because it doesn't compress that much, it has its density. So I think that one of the things that we can tell the riders and the fitters is that soft is not better. That's a guideline.
Exactly. the funny part is what you say, Maria, in terms of the military. This is my massive nerdy geeky bit, because I don't know, because I have a book from the World War One. I have a World War One horsemanship manual, so for the cavalry, and it's absolutely fascinating when you start reading books like that, because they turn around and they suddenly explain the reasons why they use felt, or the way why they fold blankets in a certain way to lift the horse up at the front, or lift the saddle at the front, or lift it at the back, or if you've got an asymmetry, so on and so forth.
And to adapt to the how fat how big the horse is right now.
But what's really interesting is you suddenly sit down and you kind of go, but why did they shift from serge panels to leather? And the reasons why they moved from serge panels to leather is because of the war. Because they needed serge, because everybody was going to war, so they needed the serge for the uniforms, because all the uniforms were made of serge. So suddenly the saddle industry had to go, well, we haven't got enough serge, so we're going to have to start making panels out of leather. And actually, when you look at leather in terms of a panel, it is not efficient, because it's not elastic enough. It doesn't allow breathability, because you are impacted by the grain and the way the cellular structure is within the leather. So you suddenly go, historically, saddles always were supposed to have serge panels and felt panels. They were never supposed to have leather-made panels. We only made leather panels because there was a lack of serge wool because of the war effort. And that has now just carried on because of society, because it's now become society normal to have a leather panel. And you sit there and go, but it's a useless material. It's not appropriate material for the impact what we're doing. And it's where you suddenly look at historical books and you start doing research into old historical saddles and saddlery. And that's where you just sit there and go, oh, we've made a big decision in terms of pretty and actually what is functional and what's right and various things like that. So it's absolutely fascinating. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on in terms of panel materials and so on and so forth.
Can I just say that the old-fashioned felt was more likely to have been made from horsehair, which we don't do that anymore. My carpet fitter told me this.
Yeah.
So it's not that we should all be using felt, because that's synthetic these days. We still have to be
absolutely
careful, but also serge panels. the ones I've come across always have not given enough support because of what's between the serge and the tree.
And it's also amazing. It's a real skill to flock a saddle with a serge panel, because serge panels, they don't allow stretch. Once you've overflocked a serge panel, that's it. You know, that's it done. It doesn't retract back in. Like, for example, I've got a serge panel here. It's a little bit moth-eaten, so kind of in there. But you can see, if I can get it up close, you can see where it's moth-eaten and various things like that. But the problem is, you know, you've got a leather back and you've got a serge kind of lining. And the problem is again, once you've overflocked it, because it's been overflocked at the front here, if it's been overflocked, it's bulged and you can't do anything. You have to take the whole panel off to then redo the whole thing, and it's really not massively cost effective. But that's what I mean is we can be better in terms of the material science and understanding how the materials work, which is why I'm a big lover of what we call hybridization of padding. Because I'm looking at panels like that where we are just putting loads of flock in and it's all the same material, or we're just putting all the same singular material into it, and it makes no sense, you know.
No, you can
because you sit there and go, like, if you look at that panel, the forces which are applied to this area is different, which is applied to this area, which is different to apply to here, which is different to apply to here, which is different to apply to kind of down here. All of a sudden, you sit there and go, it makes no sense. And especially then when you start including things like stirrup bars and stirrup bar location, which we're not going to get into because that's a bigger topic. But yeah, this is why understanding the physics of how saddles work, you know, you get this deflection going off of forces. It's really, really, really important, because if the material's stiff, then you're always trying to compensate. You're always trying to go, right, the tree's really stiff, so we're going to have to add more padding to try and stop it because the horse's rib cage is going to change shape. Right, okay. And if the tree's really flexible, then you've got to apply some form of stiffening material to then allow the forces to be spread.
Yeah.
So we're all trying to kind of 51% this, 49% this, 60% of that, 40% of this. We're all trying to achieve this kind of golden kind of relationship between stiffness or stability and flexibility. The difficulty is that is so unique to every horse and every rider that it's nigh on impossible to make a product, one singular product, which works for all.
A friend of mine, if we compare it to the motorsport, where you kind of try to set all the mechanical parts so that they, you know, you have the spring and you have the suspension and you have all this, you know, they work for a year just to get a race car exactly right.
Yeah.
You will have motorbike riders, you know, where they will feel if you have different oil in the front of the steering wheel suspension of the bike, if there's different oil in it, even if it's kind of the same, because it will behave differently.
Yeah.
So I think as an industry, we're nowhere close to understand any of this. But, you know, just like you, I've been thinking about, okay, do I need the same material along the whole panel? Or should I think about where I have maximum impact and where I just have a balancing job?
Exactly, because this is the thing, is that when you actually start looking at, let's do the example of, you know, Formula One or motorsport. There was some testing done where they mocked up a car, and then what they did is they gave it the same car to every race car driver, and they all got different results. Then what they did is they then tweaked the car to the individual specifications of each driver, because every driver has a different driving style. For example, one might be a bit too aggressive into a corner and kind of not so aggressive coming out the corner. The other one might be the opposite way around. So therefore, you set up the car, the same car, differently, and then what they did is they then gave it to the drivers again and whizzed round. And obviously the numbers changed quite dramatically, because whenever a driver had a car set up for them, their numbers exponentially increased. But for every other driver, it didn't increase that much. There was still, it worked for some, but it didn't work to the same degree. But when every driver had their own specifications put into the car, that it was always a massive jump from their industry standard to then suddenly their own bespoke, customized kind of adjustments. And that's the level we really need to be pitching at, because it's proven it can be done. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big advocate for this. It's proven. We're not trying to prove concept. We already know that exists in the motorsport industry. It's going, right, how do we take that and apply it to this? Because it can.
I have just I worked for about 6 years to get this kind of wool that we now finally have managed to get our hands on. And we have a test rider who basically called up and screamed on the phone, delighted with how the horses reacted and what was going on with this particular wool. And my reaction to that was, okay, that's good. Now we don't know why that's working for you, and we don't know if it's going to work for somebody else. But but let's see what we can learn starting from this.
So we need a lot of adjustability in these generic saddles, not just width at the front and length of flap, etc., type of flocking, but we really need to, I think, be able to open these panels quite easily and put in what individual riders need. There is a question in the audience there, which I've sort of been flapping about with, to do with the channel. So if we could flip back to that, unless you've got anything more to say on panels. She says, I've been asked to supply saddles with 10 centimetre channels, which we were talking about earlier, due to a lot of publicity from a particular approach that endorses this. But I just wanted to show you, the width of these vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae, are, without having the ribs attached, remember, they will spring from the side, but the width is approximately 4 centimeters, and this is a 12-2 pony who's not expected to use its back in the same way usually as a much bigger horse, a warm blood, thoroughbred, etc. So the question is, my question is that, has anyone tested, measured how much space the horse needs for its back to function, to be mobile?
I see that this width is different on different horses. So you will have some horses with really thin vertebrae, and then you will have some with really wide, and then you have the ligaments running across on the outside. So what we're seeing is basically you need to be able to free those ligaments, but like Bradley was saying, when you take the panel, it's not depending on how you designed it, you want the weight to hit, let's see, on the middle of the panel first, and then to spread out so that you get the weight on the whole part of the tree. That means you're really not going to get any weight at the very inside of the panel. So it comes down also to how round or flat the panel is, how the horse lifts you, the shape of the tree, and the shape of the panel. If you overstuff a panel, it's going to become too round, like we said before. And if you stuff it too little, have it too wide, it's going to float more to the inside. So when we try to have too much channel, move the panels too much out, the saddle will fall down and create more problems on some horses. So there are horses that need a wider channel where we do move things apart to up to 10 centimeters, but normally we will have around 8 centimeters and not go wider than that.
Okay, so the aim is for the horse to preserve its back function, because we need the horse to be comfortable, to be mobile, although there isn't a lot of mobility in the spine, but we do need that. And as you said earlier, they need to be able to engage the thoracic sling and the vertical wither movement.
And that it's further back than you will think. So there's more things going on underneath the stirrup bar.
Okay.
So this is, so when you're underneath the stirrup bar, which is this area, you're not at the very front. So when you're underneath the stirrup bar, that is in the area where you have, the horse needs to push in this very area. You have more concentrated weight coming down right there. And you have also the girth strap in that area. So, you have to get the combination of all these things and the angle of the tree right here. So what I say, normally is that if you check the horse and want to know how the load is underneath the stirrup bar, you can always check underneath the saddle where the pressure is, if it's on the outside or if it's more towards up in the channel. You can also use a flexi curve to actually put the measure on the inside in the saddle. And then as you measure the horse, you can also measure, you measure the horse, you measure the saddle and put in, so you see how the curvature is. Because the biggest risk is really the shape of the tree not actually fitting the shape of the horse. And that's where you get these problems like Bradley are talking about, that you're not going to get the distribution of the pressure at all, because it's going to be centered either at the very inside or at the very outside of the panel. So you're not getting a distribution. I think that is a bigger problem than any of the other things, that you're actually you don't have the right shape across at the tree in this area where you have all this focus of weight. And that's both going to throw the saddle to the side, and it's also going to get a lot of pressure either at the very inside of the panel or at the outside. I don't know if that's also Bradley's thinking.
Yes, but also it depends very much on the type of tree.
Yeah.
So for example, a wooden tree is going to behave very differently to a plastic tree, which is going to behave differently to a kind of carbon fiber tree. So the difficulty in that's where you can sit there and go, and I'm trying desperately not to name brands, because I don't want to kind of do it, because it puts everybody into a bit of an awkward situation. But if you've got a tree which is designed or has been retroactively adjusted, either cut grooves into it and various kind of weird things like that to make it more flexible and pliable, it's going to behave differently, which then puts different loading pressures upon the panel in a slightly different way. So like what Maria has just shown, I've got a thing, and it's very, very old, but I've cut it in half to kind of show where your girth straps are, and then B, all the leather work and all the gump to try and help people understand what goes on. That needs a clean. Kind of what the hell is going on? Because if you put a load here, in terms of how that affects the panel, and the size of the panel, and so on and so forth. So you can certainly turn around and go, right, you're not actually going to put that much load onto the inside of a panel, but it depends on how the tree is behaved, or how it's been designed to behave. And then also it depends very much on how what the tree and the saddle has been designed to do, i.e. dressage, jumping, so on and so forth, because the behavior of a tree which is designed to jump is designed in a slightly different way to a tree which has been designed to do dressage, which is designed to be doing eventing or endurance or polo and so on and so forth. Is that all of these kind of different disciplines which we do, they all need different designs from the ground up. They do need that. So it's not, from my point of view, it's not as simplistic as a tree or a panel, which is, because they all behave differently. So for example, I can turn around and go, I know what happens with our panel and our tree, because we have a very flexible equine tree. We have a very rigid, hard rider tree. So they're designed to behave differently. So I know that the panel, for example, the pressures and everything like that, you get a different loading mechanic going on. But that's because I know the nerdy bits behind what I've worked on and I've invented and various things like that. But that logic can't be applied to a plastic tree run by a major corporation saddlery company, or a kind of traditional wooden tree.
Should we divide them? Should we divide them so that people understand? We have some plastic trees that actually open a little bit.
Yes.
So when you put a load, because they don't have iron in they don't have anything that keeps the shape, so they will actually open a little bit.
Yeah.
Which means, depending on the load and the force and the weight of the rider and the type of panel that you have, that saddle will change shape a little bit onto the horse.
Yeah.
Which then it might work really good for a lighter rider.
Yeah.
And where if you have a heavy rider landing after a jump on a tree that opens, you will get a problem.
Yeah.
Then you will have plastic trees where you actually have an iron frame at the very front.
Yeah.
They will not open, but they may actually bend a little bit, flexible under the rider. And again, then, they will be set in the front, but they will bend in the middle a little bit, which means they normally can twist a little bit also. And that then, in both these cases, you need a firmer panel.
Yeah, exactly. Because then it's a distribution of force, exactly. And that's where I was saying is that you're always playing with this kind of ratio of stiffness to flexibility.
Yeah.
And if you design something which is relatively soft, you then have to harden it up or stiffen it up with the inclusion of other materials. So this is where it gets into that kind of nerdy element, because you sit there and go, if you've got a stiff tree and then you've got a stiff panel, you sit there and go, that's a whole series of wrong. Because you're going to have a very stiff product, which is then going to be reinforced by further stiffness of padding or panel design and everything like that. So you've got to make sure that the horse's musculature is hard enough to take all of that force. And it can happen, that's not a problem. But you may end up having a stiff tree and actually a really soft panel, or a really kind of cushioned panel, because that's what it's designed to do.
But that doesn't work.
But, I'm not saying it works. I'm just saying, that's their logic, is in terms of, if you've got a very flexible,
if we're teaching them about load, let's say that you cannot have something really stiff on top of something really.
No. If you're doing something like that, if you keep adding stiffness, then all of a sudden you're just making it harder and harder and harder, and then all of a sudden that's where you go into that, where the softest material is always just gonna basically go, flat, done. That's it.
Which is then, if we go into the load, what a lot of people then, if you think you're heavier and you're like, I'm going to put a lamb's wool pad underneath my saddle, because I'm going to be nice.
Yeah.
That is a common thing. And, you know, I used to sell lamb's wool pads, but what I find is that a lot of the time, you know, you would say it's like adding an extra layer of muscle to the horse, because maybe the horse was not having enough muscle. But a lot of the time it will be too soft, and it will create movement and instability.
Yeah.
So most of the time, if you do put a layer underneath the horse, it should be an impact control layer that actually stabilizes and just stops the forces from coming through. And like we say, the softer the tree, the softer the saddle you have, the better impact control you can add underneath the saddle to actually stop the forces from coming through.
Yeah.
You know, if we're going to give any firm advice on how to deal with this.
So, I think what I'm hearing before I bring Emma in here is that we've got the most work to do on the rider, because we can't keep accommodating heavy riders.
Yeah, right. So that you're absolutely right. This is where it comes down to a choice in some regards, and that you have to go right. And this is where I always go in terms of standards and manufacturing and everything like that, because the reasons why I'm a big advocate for it, because it gives you boundaries from a manufacturer's perspective, from a saddle fitter's perspective, of responsibility, a boundary of responsibility. Because if you sit there and go, right, a material or a product is only supposed to protect the horse to this weight value or to this load value. Beyond that, the product is not designed to go further than that. That gives the saddle fitter, the saddle manufacturer, the saddle industry, the equine industry, a layer of protection, so that if you are above that weight, that is not the product's fault. That cannot be held responsible. That is not the saddle fitter's fault. That they cannot be held responsible. And all of a sudden, you sit there and go, right, that's now the responsibility of the individual, which is you're dealing with. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for standards, because there's a whole multiplicity of the reasons why, but it creates protection for the industry on multiple levels. Because you can't, as a manufacturer or anybody, you can't keep turning and accommodating in a product to just go, right, okay, you're a bit bigger. Okay, right, we'll just add more padding. Or, okay, you're a bit bigger again. Right, we're just going to add more padding. And it just becomes, you're trying to then turn around and go, right, there's only so much material can cope with. You know, materials can't, they're not the answer to everything, you know, and that's where, as I said, you know, like with Maria, she talks a lot about getting the balance right, and you know, and she's absolutely correct and true there. You sit there and go, you're spot on in terms of getting the balance, the rider balance. But a product, it should not be held responsible to doing that. It can facilitate, it can help do that. But it shouldn't take over the responsibility of having an independent seat or having an independent balance. And that's the difficulty, is we can, as saddle designers and saddle inventors and creators and fitters and everybody like that, we can overthink it. I think everybody here can really understand that we massively overthink it. And that we can over design and we can over create and we can overcompensate. By, you know, shimmying up the saddle and giving them a bit more protection and trying to make the rider not move at all and forcibly balancing the rider. Well, you sit there and go, well, if you're doing that, then they're not creating an independent seat, and they're not creating their own core stability, not their own strength, which then leads into the next problem. And you kind of inadvertently, by being nice, you're setting people up to fail. And you're setting the horse up to fail. And that's why we need a division of responsibility. And I totally agree with what you're saying, Caroline, in terms of we need to kind of sometimes pull away and go, this isn't the saddle's responsibility here to do this. This is your responsibility to get fit, to get strong, to do all of that type of stuff. And we have somebody like Emma who's proven it.
And Emma, and what Emma said last time we spoke about, when you generously shared your video with when you got on your horse the first time, and then you said you trained your core, and then you got on it again, and it wasn't that much about the weight reduction, but about your body control.
Exactly. Yeah. How
I've
my
spoke to,
muscles.
and that was beautiful. And I spoke to a customer who actually had a knee replacement. But, and I said to her, and she's got quite a young horse. So I said to her that, I understand that, weight control has not been easy in this situation. And I gave your example that, this is what you can do. You can do these things off the horse, you can do these things with the horse. But if you start a core regime, you will be so much better off in helping your horse. And it will set you off in a good thing, and make it possible for you to feel good about what you're doing and doing for your horse. And I thought that was really,
it's such an important message, I think, for the saddle fitters out there who are really struggling. They might go to an appointment and the horse and rider combo are not compatible, but obviously the rider is looking for a saddle to be fitted, and it's so difficult to say, well, I can't fit a saddle because you can't say to somebody, well, you're too heavy, because there's no, as Bradley's saying, there's no guidelines, there's no kind of, you're taking the law into your own hands, really, telling somebody, well, actually, no, you're too heavy for your horse. But it's up to riders to take that responsibility. If they want to ride a horse, then they have to look at their own, not just their weight, but their strengths and their own balance and their will to want to make a change if they are on the heavier end of where they should be.
I think that the difficulty as well is that the saddle fitter is called out to fit. First of all, how far do they go? Because it's not in the training, any training that I've seen to actually.
And my saddle fitter, my experience with her was fantastic, really, because I was so conscious of my weight and making sure that the saddle fitted me and fitted the horse and wasn't past the designated area on his back, and to the point where we had saddle on a saddle book for me to sit in before we put it on the horse, because if you're not comfortable as a rider, your horse is not going to be comfortable. And I think she was very diplomatic. I actually know her quite well, so it actually worked really, really well that I was able to discuss that I didn't feel that my thighs fitted into this saddle, or the knee block was in the wrong place. Because when you have bigger legs, like I do, even I ride quite long, the knee block pushes my weight, pushes my whole leg kind of backwards, which then shifts my seat from the middle of the saddle. So that was a consideration, and you can kind of coach somebody through getting a saddle that is slightly on the heavier side by just being, I suppose, as a saddle fitter, being more aware of different body types and how they affect the overall fit, and not just the two elements of horse and rider.
But should the coaches have this information and training?
Yeah, definitely.
Up to the saddle fitter?
Because I see children now are bigger.
heavier.
And it's one thing to say to an adult, well, maybe you should go for an 18-inch saddle, but you can't say that to a child. I mean, you just or a vulnerable person, and maybe we just need to have more education out there for instructors and coaches and trainers and saddle fitters and anybody that's in that kind of equestrian sphere. And I see the whole the whole mindset about being heavier as well is so important. We don't really give it enough time. That's my next focus.
It looks like I'm actually gonna be doing a clinic or a series of something in the spring in UK, where it will be possible to learn some of these things, because we do use this technique of actually putting people on a buck, but then the buck may actually, they're normally quite narrow. So if you're going to put a saddle on a buck, you actually have to beef it up, because the legs of the rider will go more forward the wider the buck or the wider the saddle is. And that is then an issue you have to kind of understand. What does that, how does it feel to sit on your horse? What does your saddle look like? So, we are going to teach some of these things together with, rider balance and body awareness and some of the things that riders can do to increase their control of their body. It's not hard.
No, it isn't. But it is. I think it's the old age thing as well, and the whole equestrian field. It is extra large is a ladies 14, which is just which really puts pressure on young people coming up to think, oh, God, that's just I can't wear an extra large. And then they stop eating, and it spirals out of control. I mean, it's really difficult to know with saddle fitting, where do you stop if you go to an appointment? Where is that line that you cannot cross as a saddle fitter? And at the moment, you have no regulation to kind of say, look, I can't actually fit a saddle for you today.
No.
Maria, you touched on a couple of times in earlier summits. You've touched upon how things have to be before you will even supply a saddle. So, what can saddle fitters do to help avoid
one of the first things I think is how we do a booking. What kind of information we have about the rider before we even do the booking. So I would say that as a fitter, you should always pre-vet both horse and rider a little bit before because if you have some good information in that booking, it gives you a chance to have that discussion with that rider. Because they might have put that weight in there, and they get that chance to explain a little bit where they're at and what they're experiencing. So then it becomes it gives you a chance to have that chat. Okay, where are you? I can see what you're experiencing, and with your weight here, what is your experience? What's going on with you right now? That gives them a chance to say where they're at. And I think that what we need as fitters is a team where we can actually give them a red thread and maybe give them a health coach. I work with Dave Sanders now, and one of the good things with Rider Reboot is that he will start with stress. He will start with diet. He will start with your mental, because you can't make any good changes if you're completely worn out, if you're stressed out, or you can't control your mind, because nothing good will happen. And I think a lot of riders will need that. He will bring up things as, how, with your breathing, and then you go into your body and you start making good changes. Because you need to give these people time, and you need them to feel a little bit good about themselves. I think,
absolutely.
We got that from Emma. You need to get something that can make you feel a bit good about what you're doing.
It really does come from the mind, the whole mindset, and how, you need to focus and get the positivity flowing. Because, somebody can have an accident or a really rough time, and it then kind of spirals out of control, because then they get heavier, and then they can't exercise. And when we discussed it earlier in December, I was adamant I didn't want to give up riding, even though I knew I was still under the 20%, but in my heart I was like, oh my God, this poor horse, he's a chunky monkey, like, do you know what I mean? But I was like, oh, this is why I went down the whole route of, I used to lunge him so he was warmed up. I would go off and do on the mountain block and my stretches, and I would run around and warm myself up. And I think those sort of things, maybe I should start writing some of this down so that we can use it, make
I
it more
think it has
widely
to do with
available.
guilt. Yeah. So riders, have to cope with a lot of guilt anyway for whatever, they feel that they're not doing well enough for their horse.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so the weight is just another load on their shoulders of
Yeah.
weight. So I think that as a fitter, we can talk about that guilt. We can bring it up nicely and try to, help them with how to cope with that guilt, how to take a first step. Because a lot of the time they will also have guilt because they didn't do the right thing before you came there. There was a lot of things they didn't know before you turned up at their stable.
Their first positive thing is to call a saddle fitter.
Yeah.
They want to do the best for their horse.
Exactly. So you have to do it today. Okay, we say, okay, we shed a few tears, and then we say, okay, this is the first day. Yeah. Now today we found these things out. Today we got these options. Now we know these things. Okay, let's start to take a few steps forward from now, and just get rid of that, the guilt stuff we have backwards. So in a way, as a fitter, you can take them in the hand, and you can show them the path. They have to walk the path, but we have to kind of show them that there is a path there.
Yeah, but it'd be great for you guys as fitters to have availability to more. Lost my words now, but that resource.
Yep.
That I went away and thought about what I wanted to do because I drew on my own, I suppose, life experience and thought, right, this is what I'm going to do. But it'd be really good to be able to have that kind of resource available to give to somebody and say, look, you're not the only one, but these are the first steps, and this is what you can. And I'm all for. Go on, Karen.
Sorry, I was just going to say what I'm sort of hearing here is that the insurance alarm bells ringing.
Yes.
Because someone who is feeling stress, guilt, etc., emotional, is vulnerable. I mean, that's kind of most of us at the moment. But where is the line to be drawn?
Yeah.
Should the coaches who potentially do have the insurance that covers this, shouldn't the coaches will be saying, hey, I think you tend to be a bit emotional for us to do this lesson today, or whatever, for example, or you have put on a bit of weight and I notice a difference in your performance? Or is it that I'm going to sound awful here, but is it that a lot of the equestrian professionals are just going out there and earning their keep? So that they don't.
I think we have a third group of professionals coming in who we are trying to team up with. So the fitters in my team all work with another set of professionals, and David is actually right now, because he felt, he's seeing that it's been very hard to train people who have no idea about the body, the human body. Yeah. So you really need people who have a crossover knowledge of a little bit of equestrian and about training and the physiology. Yeah. So there is a lot of training now going on where riders train, without their horse.
Yeah.
So you need, as a rider, you need to get in contact and find your type of training off the horse. You have to find, one that you either click with, or one that is close to you, or somebody who will offer good services online, where you can do one-on-one to find out, okay, where am I at? What's my situation right now? So you need to establish a now situation. And based on that, you need to start doing something. And then you need to check in again, just like with the fitter and with the horse changing. And say, okay, what's my, what are my challenges right now? And then you go on. So I think that what is happening and has to happen in our industry is that riders need to start that, the fitness and the coordination, the balance, the core, the stability. They need that whole set of training.
And they need to be supported through that. And I think
they need to be supported.
Working in that industry who has got to, and especially for saddle fitters who have to broach that kind of subject when you're going out.
Yeah.
I'm sure my
And
saddle fitter was thinking, "Oh, good grief! Don't want this girl to get on this horse." But
it
when she was
really
doing
helps.
it
really helps if you have somebody who's really good to turn them over to. And I
Yeah.
know that for a fact right now, there are people learning to become that fitness coach who also understands the equestrian demands.
Yeah.
And that is happening right now. So I think fitters need to team up with really good equestrian fitness coaches so that they can, give people that bridge.
And the whole shame aspect has to be gone. The whole pulling somebody down and, at the end of the day, I think if they've rung to get a saddle fitter out, they want to do the right thing. And you can give them all that. And I'm going to say there are people out there who don't want to do the right thing either. But,
so, I want to come back to you, Emma, about how you did this. But Bradley, you want to say something?
I absolutely agree with everything which has been said. But this is where I slightly, and if you've heard me talk before, then you'll know that I'm banging the same drum. But this is where I turn around and go, objectivity is the king here, because if you have a way of objectively testing the horse or testing the rider in terms of, say, core stability test, you're not making it personal. You are literally saying, right, okay, let's for example just say, right, you get down and do a plank. Okay, I'm not advocating that, but if you said, right, do a plank exercise, how long can you hold it for? You can only hold it for 20 seconds. Right, well, that's your mark in the ground. That's not me passing judgment. There's no judgment there. You sit there and kind of go, right, that's your number. That's no fine. And from my perspective as from saddle fitting, if you can make it as much as you can, make it objective, so then it's not your personal. Nobody can take it as a personal attack. Nobody can take it personally. You can just go, look, that's your numbers. That's fine. That's not a problem. Go away, do these exercises, go and find a coach, go and find a trainer, and then we'll come back in a month or 8 weeks time or however long, and we can retest again, and then cause effect. And if you're able to do something objectively, then all of a sudden you're protected, because you have a logical reason of why you've done a certain thing and the adjustments and the changes which you've made. So it's a way of protecting the saddle fitter. It's a way of protecting the horse. But it's also a way of then removing the saddle fitter from a difficult situation of opinion. For example, I turn around and go, I think you're too heavy. That's where the argument has come in, where they've said, right, if you're hitting this weight and you're above this weight, the industry did that, didn't they? They introduced the weight value and said, right, if you're above that, you can't ride. And you sit there and go, yeah, okay, brilliant. It's a blunt tool.
Yeah.
But that's where I think, as I say, if you apply other metrics to it, it gives you a little bit more of a leeway. You sit there and go, right, if you are, for example, like me, 120 kilos, and you've got no core and you're not very strong and so on and so forth, you can't ride. You actually need to go away and actually improve your core stability or your strength value or anything like that.
As Dave would say, definite red light.
But I want to say, but you still want to fit that. You still want to fit a saddle at that stage.
No.
Pardon?
Would you still want to fit a saddle at that stage? If somebody, like if I came to you there when I was at my heaviest with no core and I'd only just started riding again, and I'd say, okay, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I want a better saddle for my horse because I know I'm too heavy.
Yeah.
I know all the variables and I know what I'm doing wrong and I know what I must do, but I still want a better saddle for him.
Yeah.
Are you going to say, well, no, go away and get fitter and ride in the old one?
Right. So me personally, I would turn around and then ask if you could have or may have somebody else riding the horse. Because if you have somebody else riding the horse as well, temporarily, whilst you lose the weight or get stronger and everything like that. Because as I said, it's a scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you've got a horse which is kind of unfit and you're unfit, well, if you're going away and getting yourself fit and strong, and the horse is going and doing the groundwork, but theoretically could have somebody, say, lighter ride him temporarily, then you'd sit there and go, well, you can still fit a saddle to the horse, albeit for a lighter rider. But then you would need the lighter rider to be there at the saddle fitting. So do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't personally. That's a personal thing. If you turn around to me and said, I don't have anybody else to ride him or anything like that, then I'd sit there and kind of go, well, then in which case, let's do the groundwork first. If you want to fit a saddle onto him just so that he gets used to a saddle being on top of him, if he's not had a saddle on him for a long period of time, then you sit there and go, let's put a saddle onto him. I'm quite I'm quite inventive. So what I would do is I would create a saddle which can then have weights applied to it, so the horse can get used to a weight value.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So
yeah, it could be tricky, can't it?
I'm going to drop a little bit of a bomb here, but so I have a saddle which allows me to apply weight on.
Ship it over to me. I could do with that for my youngster.
Yeah. So I have a saddle which I've created, which essentially has loads of pockets on it, which means that I can incrementally increase the weight on the saddle, if you see what I mean. And we can go up to about 100 kilos because we have plates which we just stack on. It's very rudimentary. It's very it's the kind of thing, but we can do that. Now
we have to take the weight cloth like you do as a jockey. I used to have to do.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of like that, but it's very archaic. Trust me. But because I wanted to experiment, I wanted to play around with it. I wanted to see if you could train a horse and build it up, just like you do with weightlifting. You incrementally train the horse and you just put more weight on top, more weight on top, more weight on top. Now, you never go in and start off at 100 kilos. That's just wrong. But what you do is you can then have a saddle which you can then add weight to it. But that's kind of hidden away and kind of very rarely gets to see the thing. But the principle works. Whether we ever actually carry that invention through and actually kind of go, right, is this a good training aid for developing horses and young horses and everything like that to get used to weight values onto their back and everything like that, whether we do it or not is different.
I have another trick there. I asked them to, if I would be set in the same situation, we actually introduced the slow walk with like the little bit downhill, because it increases the braking power, and that is to use the longissimus muscle, which is what has to then be used for the horse to carry the rider. So if you do come to me and I would see your booking and you have this, okay, I haven't been ridden, I've had this, I haven't been riding because I've had this, I would probably ask you to do the in-hand work for another month while you start the other thing to start with. And that is because we know that if we start in that situation, the fit of the saddle and how you sit, like you say, how your legs fall and where you end up, we wouldn't be fitting the saddle that you actually want to use.
Yeah.
So normally I would just explain to a customer that, what is your plan? Do you want to change saddle every 3 months? We can't adjust it really for your weight. If we do this saddle now, because you have some extra fluff right now, we do an 18, but we just measured, if we measure your pelvis, we might see that you're 16 and a half, 17. So you're going to be sliding around in that saddle.
Yeah.
So, I try to motivate them to find that window of,
yes. Yeah.
the right window. And then we actually do the testing of the rider, which Bradley, you were touching on. So we test the rider's ability to be symmetrical and to use their body on the buck and standing. And we do this so that we can see where the rider is at, and for the rider to discover how, their physics is working. So when the rider discovers that they can't stabilize one side or that they can't do a certain thing, they automatically also think that, oh, is this why my horse maybe does this?
Yeah.
Is this why this is happening?
There's usually a reason why a horse is doing something. It's usually something
Yeah.
we're doing.
Yeah. So we give the rider a chance to discover that by the tests we do standing and on the buck. And once the rider has discovered for themselves, there's no turning back.
Yeah.
Because it means that suddenly the rider feels that, oh, shit. Now I have a responsibility because I am causing this.
You need to send
There's
me
no
all this.
shame in that. It's just a discovery.
You need to send me these list of exercises and I'll video myself doing them, and we'll see what I'm like in 6 months when I've done some more work.
Yes.
Emma, I've nearly finished writing my book, and I've got a whole new workshop and a mechanical horse and about 10 or 15 pieces of equipment, rider specific, that they can do, all from Marketplace, so making them very accessible to buy. But I just want to come back to you because we have gone over time here. Amazing information. But Emma, we didn't ask you how you lost your weight. So 2 things I want to ask you is, one, what advice have you got for other riders who maybe are interested or motivated in beginning a journey such as you had, because you've been on the other side. We want to know how you got yourself back again, food, exercise. And the other thing that I must know how you want to be treated by saddle fitters. What service should they provide? How should they speak to you? So anyway, the floor is yours, because we want to know your secret.
So I think for the whole weight loss mindset, I had to get my own mind around what I wanted and where I was going to start this journey, and I kept putting off the start date. But it was really just finding time in my schedule for me and not feeling guilty about it. And it's so difficult when you're working full time, or you're a mum and you're rushing around. You have to make time every day for your own self-care and your own self-growth, and not to feel that, well, my family's not getting me for that half an hour. Because it's so important. Then you use that time to meditate or work on your core or whatever you want to do, whether it be put some music on and dance around the room. I think you need to take out at least half an hour a day just for you, and focus on what your needs are, because I think we forget, as I'm going to say this, as modern women and men, we just we're rushing around looking after the family or our work, and we never take that kind of time out to nourish ourselves. The other thing, I suppose, I work very closely with a nutritionalist in my local town who's very good, and he taught me for my age and my body type and what foods I should be eating and what foods to avoid. Nothing was ever off the menu, which was another big thing that I found. I didn't want to ever be hungry. I can't be hungry. And if you said, no, you can't have a piece of cake, that was all I would want. And then when I got the cake, I would eat the whole thing. So have the slice of cake, walk for an extra 5 minutes. You can't deprive yourself your whole life. Otherwise, what's the point? If I can't have cake and a glass of wine, then I might as well just pack in. So I think, and then it was really challenging then, once I understood what I could eat, which was not what I could eat, what was best for me at my age and hormones and body type and what I wanted to achieve. It was then just, once I learned that, I started to do a lot of my own meal prep. So then, it's just being organized around making meals for myself. Because if you're not, you'll be like, oh, I'll just go to the shop and I'll grab, or I'll go to the chip shop, and it's easy to order a takeaway and get pizza delivered. But if you're organized, and that was the big one for me. It took me such a long
Any
time
tips
to
for
master
people who
that.
are not organized? What to always have around, except for eggs and carrots?
Well, like actually, yeah, I mean, like rice, noodles, anything, and I used to go through this phase where I'd be like, oh, I have to have something to eat. I'm ravenous, and my kind of monkey on my shoulder would be taking control, and it was like, eat the chocolate bar, eat the crisps. You have to have that. You're going to die. You're so hungry. And I'd be like, take a deep breath. It's going to be all right. Your dinner will be ready in a minute. And I think we're all a bit guilty of that. So it's sometimes just to take that moment to say, actually, you're going to eat in a minute. It's going to be fine. Breathe. And then I used to go out and put myself in the whole road of, I could go past the fish and chip shop and not have to go in and get a burger and chips. And, you have to expose yourself to get control of yourself almost. And it's not like you were out of control before, like a maniac, but it's the small things of not having a bag of crisps and chocolate bar before your dinner. And it's okay if you do. You just need to go and make sure that that they're added to your list and you don't forget. The other thing I really did was I just tracked not really my calories, but more my fat and sugar, because that was what for me was keeping the weight, was too much sugar and too much fat in the food. So once I got to grips with that and ate more, calorie dense food rather than grapes rather than raisins, kind of, that's the easiest interpretation, then that had kind of helped me understand what I could do to to speed up my weight loss.
So can I just ask, you mentioned that you were doing core training exercise. Did that accelerate the weight loss for you and the fitness
I don't think so. I don't think so. Not the weight loss. I think I felt like I'm not great for cardio, but you see, I think like I have 6 or 7 horses at home, so I'm really active anyway. I'm doing 20, maybe 25,000 steps a day, every day, but I still wasn't losing any weight. So it was more to control the sugar and fat intake.
Right.
But really, when I first started and I have a little app that I use, and there's loads of free ones, I was just and you can just scan the barcode on your cake and it puts all the macros in and everything, which I'd never looked at. But at the end of the day, I'd be like, oh gosh, did I eat that much? Because I never really realized how many calories and how much fat and how much sugar were going in. I was just like, oh, sure, it's fine. I'll have another cappuccino, it'll be grand. And I think that just to see it on paper kind of made me realize that, okay, now tomorrow I'm going to eat less. I was kind of challenging myself all the time to get my fat level. And you obviously have to have healthy fats, and and it doesn't matter if you have a day where you do what you like, because that's okay too. You've still got to enjoy life. Clearly I still enjoy life. I've got another long way to go. I must lose another few stone. But it was just to keep the motivation going, and I used to have the little post-its around and light bulbs to remind me that my horse is called Mac, so Mac needs you to be fitter, lighter.
If I ask you, because you mentioned the stress, and I think, if I'm not wrong, that we're wired, so if we're stressed, our brain is actually thinking that there's something bad going to happen.
So you need to eat.
If something bad is going to happen, you better grab as many calories as you can, because we might, find ourselves in Ukraine any minute. So we are hardwired to find all these calories. So the more stressed we are, and the more shame and the more stress we carry, I think the more inclined we will be to grab anything to eat.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
like you said,
And that's
mental
where the prep really came in useful.
Yeah.
Making sure that I could just go to the fridge or go to the freezer and get out the meal and put it in the oven and not have to think, oh, I just can't do this today. I'm going to go and have chicken burger and chips.
Mm.
And actually not to beat yourself up if you do that.
Mm.
It's not a, you know, kind of stop-go process. It's a whole, you know, if you have a bad day, you have a bad day. That doesn't mean you failed.
Mm.
Which is what a lot of people think they be on a diet. And I never called mine a diet. It was, oh, well, I might as well forget it now because I've had a Mars bar.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
you just
give up.
keep going. Yeah.
I've got a super hint actually. I've been eating for 2 weeks at intervals, but our ancestors used to get a variety of 30 plants per week. That can include pepper, garlic. So if I start on a Sunday and if I have a bowl of Alpin, then I think, oh, great. You know, it's like collecting reward points. A bowl of Alpin might have 15 of those plants in them because of the different seeds. And then I might have a packet of 5-grain rice that I can throw in the microwave. And there's another 5 grains done. Some Mexican food. And by Tuesday, with the 5-grain wholemeal bread from Marks and Spencer's, I've done my 30 plants by Wednesday, Tuesday. So I can think, great. But what that made me do was say, I don't want a food that just has very little variety in it. I've got to have a few plants. So it's not sort of 5 a day, it's 30 a week. So you think it's not easy to do, but it really is.
It is.
And that stops you from making the unhealthy choices. You think, well, I'll have that on Thursday, but today I really want to get my plants done early.
And like I like tuna steaks and baby potatoes, and now you can't put lashings of butter and mayonnaise on them, but you know, like a fried egg actually, and rice, and you learn what's good for your own body type and what's good for you. Pickled beetroot and gherkins and things like that I lived on because I love them, and I was like, oh yeah, they're so low in calories. I'm like, nom nom nom. You know, you could have pita bread and hummus and, you know, make yourself a nice, and there's loads of things you can do, but you have to kind of get to the whole mindset of that there's nothing off the menu. And don't beat yourself up about it.
But the micro
cook an egg instead of frying it, and
the micronutrients are very, very important. We really, for our mitochondria to work, we really would need to eat 3 full plates of greens every day. And once I learned that, I was quite burned out in my head and my body, and I was like, okay, I live in Sweden. I'm not going to eat 3 plates of salad because it's bloody cold now, you know. So I was like, okay, maybe in the summer, but not in the winter. There's a simple way of getting around that. And that's basically you can today buy the greens, the super greens. And you can have spinach. And I make a shake every morning. Spinach, orange, banana, and super greens. Which means, you know, you get a lot of these micronutrients that your body needs. And when you don't have them, you're going to eat all these other things because your body is craving something. You don't know what it is.
And when you start on this journey, your body straight away starts craving sugar. And you'll be like, oh, you know.
But it's like, I like what you said earlier, Emma. It's self-care. This diet is self-care. And if we're self-harming by not living a healthy life, and we're stressed because we're malnourished, not from not eating enough, but from eating the wrong food. You know, you need the 30 plants somewhere along the line. But so to finish, I mean, we're fascinated. I don't want to finish, but just can you answer me the question, how how do you want saddle fitters to communicate with you? How can they do this successfully, or the old you that was going down through that process of?
And I think I definitely think it's really important that the saddle fitters have the option to say, look, we have this resource available if you wanted to go and learn a little bit more, or we could support you through your journey. I mean, the main thing is that they're called a saddle fitter so that they really want their horse to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And you need to kind of educate them then, because a lot of people will already know, but a lot of people won't know that, where the weight bearing surface is, where the panel fits, and where the saddle should fit on a horse. And, so it's all about educating them in the right way without making them feel ashamed or a complete failure. And also, if you've got somebody that really wants to keep going riding, and you have to fit the best you can while the two, horse and rider, are changing. And you have to be, I think, really just open and honest. And I know it's great for you guys because you're so passionate about it. But I suppose the saddle fitters out there that are working for companies that just have to meet metrics, and that's where there'll be difficulties, because they won't want to know. They just want to know how many saddles were sold that week, because it's not based on follow-up calls or actually fitting the saddle correctly to the rider and horse. But yeah, that's definitely.
You're saying it comes back a little bit to the saddle companies, because you're putting an important finger here on how many saddles do you sell.
Well, I presume that is a metric.
Yeah,
it has to be. It's commercialization, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, yeah.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I have a business, and my fitters will sometimes call me after a whole weekend being somewhere, saying, I only gave out advice this weekend. I turned them away. I did not sell them saddles. And I say,
that's
good.
Brilliant. But that's brilliant to hear.
Yeah. Or they will say, oh, I did not sell this customer because I did not think I could make it work right now. And I say, good. Because as somebody who's making or manufacturing, we cannot shut our eyes to the end consumer and to what's going on in the market.
Because the thing is, if you're just fitting saddles that don't fit, that bad press is going to be worse than any good press you could possibly have.
And this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of fitters are having problems, because they think their job is to sell and maybe not to advise. Brad, you want to say something about that?
Well, it puts you in a difficult position. It puts everybody in a difficult position. But Emma, you are kind of right. The difficulty is there is a metric which larger companies have to hit. For example, sell 10 saddles a week or whatever it is. The difficulty is that society and the society within the equestrian industry is changing. Because obviously one company is going to look at it as a business, the other person looks at it, or the consumer looks at it as their hobby or their kind of thing they do to chill out. So the two are not necessarily aligned. One is very much kind of going in the other direction. So the difficulty comes down to ethical practice and ethical business, which again, I'm going to bang the same drum. It comes back to the industry and regulation and standardization.
Yeah, it really does.
So, and that's the problem, is that if you don't have that element, then you are purely at the whim of companies and corporations and individuals like Maria and myself and everything like that, who turn around and go, right, our ethical choice is this. We are putting the horse and the rider first before sales. We're not interested. We've got to do the moral correct thing. So
but I think if companies do that, their sales will improve.
Yes,
possibly.
But the thing is, but not going to sound rude, that if you're going to put morals and ethics into the limelight, that is more of a long-term strategy rather than a short-term strategy. Now, if you've grown a business, and a lot of these older saddle companies have grown a business from a short-termist perspective, you know, I've just got to acquire for this week and next week and next week and next week. It's very difficult to get a rather big dynamical shift into more of the ethical, moral mindset. But the industry is changing, so that will happen. The other aspect is when you're and this is going to sound quite dark because I know this happens, is there are individuals and companies out there who turn around and go, right, don't make a saddle fit first time. So it means that you have to go back more, and you can then upsell the product later on. And that is I know that happens because I've been involved in the industry. I know that happens. It's not very nice. It's quite the darker side of the industry, but I know that companies have had conversations with fitters which say, well, if it doesn't fit perfectly the first time, it doesn't matter, because you
get a second call out almost.
You're going to get a second call out, which then means you can do the adjustment, and all of a sudden you look better, and then all of a sudden it doesn't fit, and it's upselling, if you see what I mean. And that is a marketing strategy, and I know that some companies do that, which makes it really difficult. Because
that's fine kind of with gym equipment, but not when it's got to go on a live sentient being that doesn't have a voice to say, oh God, get off my back, please. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the difficulty, is that
it is difficult.
As I say, and I will always bang the drum until it is regulated. If the industry is regulated and protected, everybody has the same rule book, in which case we are then all able to have boundaries and restrictions, and we can all protect each other. And then you know what the game play is. You can say, right, that's out of my jurisdiction, that's out of your jurisdiction, that's within my jurisdiction, I need to do that, you know, and so on and so forth. It's just a ring of protection, which we need to kind of really pick up and put around the consumer, around the horse, around the saddle fitter, and around the industry.
Absolutely.
You know, I have conversations. I'm quite lucky is that I'm not kind of banded out as a crazy person yet. Well, probably will be, but that I'm talking with industries who kind of understand that I'm very passionate, and I just want to protect the industry, because I've been in other industries and I've seen how they've been kind of restricted and controlled, and if we don't do it ourselves, then we're going to get it put on by somebody else.
And who doesn't have the knowledge and expertise.
And you sit there and go, it's just a way of, we need to protect ourselves, and we need to protect the industry. And I'm sorry, Maria, but this is a thing. But from my perspective, because I'm quite passionate being English and British and everything like that, I want British saddlery to be right up there at the top. And I know that we're getting expression, you know, in British saddlery and English saddlery is still held in relatively high regard, but it's being caught up by other industries, by other countries, that suddenly English saddlery is not going to be as technically superior as it was. And
can I let you in the news? It's a little bit worse than that.
You
know, if you look at it in a global perspective, the case is that the Italians, the Italian part of the industry, is far exceeded. You know, when it comes to making, you know, performance saddles, and they've done it because they have a more have a design advantage of when it comes to styling. And they've also had a very high technical inventive part, where they have been playing with different type materials and shapes.
There's a huge amount of material research. Yes.
So they went ahead, and the French have tried to catch on. They have some special horses, so the French are good in you know, in special markets where they have certain types of horses. And so both the German and the English industry have lost a lot of ground from being traditional.
Yes, and that's my point. Is I personally want to make English saddlery kind of like the gold standard. I grew up developing in the equine industry with English saddlery kind of really at the peak, and I've watched it over decades just drop and drop and drop. And I'm a massive advocate to turn around and go, no, British. And I'm going to be slightly kind of thing here, so I'm sorry, Maria, but English people, we're very inventive, we're very creative, we understand horses on a very intrinsically deep level, and we need to kind of up our game quite massively, in my opinion. And you'll hear me banging the drum, so I'm talking to various kind of industries and just go, no, we need to be better, we need to be the top. And I'm very passionate about that, because I don't want to see an industry, especially saddlery, which is what I'm really coming into now, but being therapist and everything like that, I want to pick up the industry as much as possible and kind of go, no, we need to go really far forward. Absolutely. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Maria. I know that the Italians, they're light years ahead. It's just like the Belgians and various things like that in terms of genetics and micronutrition and various things like that. They're really far ahead of
There's
the British.
one thing that needs to happen for this to happen, and I think that what is going on in each saddlery, because there's a lot of these saddleries, there's a lot of people who know how to do the work, how to build a saddle traditionally. What they need to do is to bring in basically crazy people like you and me, who can give them new information about how to make certain shapes, how to think about materials, how to learn more about modern riding, how to learn more about the modern horse, and how to adapt to that. Because there's no way that those old, maybe saddlers that once, created the design have been able to stay on top. So one of the problems is that everybody thinks they have the best idea already.
Yeah.
And for the industry to go forward, you basically need to bring together the industry and say, okay, what are the really new ideas?
Yeah.
What are the great ideas? And how can more saddleries get a hold of these ideas, utilize them, and bring it into their production? I don't want to make saddles even. I would I don't want to make saddles. We don't even have saddle makers in Sweden where I am. So, I would love to go into 4 or 5, saddleries and say, okay, these are the things, these are the measures, these are the details that you could just start, adapting, and you will be ahead again.
Yeah. And this is the thing is the problem is especially in Britain, I don't know about the rest of the world, but we have an industry where the industry is dying. Like the saddle manufacturing industry in the UK is dying. I'm very fortunate is that I'm being taught by somebody who has been doing the job for decades. He is a fantastic individual in terms of the sheer depth of knowledge. You just sat there going, you've just got so much history and so much knowledge, and the difficulty is kind of trying to get that out, because he makes some assumptions about me, and I'm kind of like, I'm not of this industry, so I'm sat there asking dumb questions like, why are you using that thickness of leather, why are you using this? And he's like, well, it's because of this and this. I'm like, you didn't tell me this. I need it's just assumed knowledge. And the thing is that is being lost, because I'm going to say this in a slightly rude way, but saddlery is not sexy. And the Italians have made saddlery sexy in terms of kind of the research which they're doing, the materials. I know of a saddle company which is using kind of CAD designers and various things like that, and using technology, and they're even talking about using AI, so artificial intelligence, in order to design saddles. And you're sat there going, this is 21st century stuff, which is where the younger generation wants to go. They don't want to sit and kind of whittle with leather and wood in their hands and everything like that. That's fine. But in order to allow the industry to grow and to get bigger and everything like that, we kind of have to move with the time. And we have to kind of encourage people to think differently. We can't just have this traditional kind of thing, which is where the rider weight issue is a really fascinating subject, because you bring in the rider weight issue and you go, design a saddle which is specifically for this weight of rider, design a saddle for this weight of rider, design a saddle for this weight of rider. And you will have different designs based on weight increase. And
I would
that,
also have different designs. We get people who ride endurance, for example, and then they sometimes come to me, and if they're a bit bigger, I'm like, no, I would like you to have a saddle that's going to stabilize you more laterally. Basically, the old military, where you have support along the sides. If we start to think how we're going to stabilize people who ride for a different amount of time, who are different sides and have different types of horses, we should expand our thinking.
absolutely.
But we're not.
No,
and
and I think it's so important that we bring technology into this, because the whole, kind of 3D printing saddles, and as you say, we've got to go away from not the knowledge that the old saddlers have, because it's so invaluable, but we need to move more into the technical aspect of things. That's where I think Ireland and the UK especially are not keeping up with what's happening around the world, because it's the but
if there was one thing you needed while you were going through this process of weight reduction and finding an appropriate saddle and getting the service from the saddle fitter, if there was one thing you needed, what was it? What would it be?
Just one thing. There's so many.
One thing you would have wanted, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That
the one thing
you couldn't get a hold of.
That I couldn't get hold of. I have a really good saddle fitter, so I guess it was just to get more encouragement, really, and more support through the whole process, and not to feel ashamed.
Right. So not to be dismissed, but to and I think that goes right across, not just saddle fitting, it goes right across the whole equestrian kind of clothes, breeches, boots. I went into a stand in badminton last year I wanted to get made to measure boots, and the lady just went, "Oh no, your legs are too fat." And I felt this big. I was quite upset, and I thought, you know what? Well, stuff you. I'm not giving you my money. And I went into, you talk about the Italians, I went into the Italian boot stand in the RDS in Dublin, and I said, "Oh, do you have any boots that would fit my calves? They're quite wide." And he said, "You have beautiful legs, darling. Come here, I can fit you." and within 2 seconds, he had patent leather boots, and he was zipping them up, and he was kneeling behind me. And I felt like a goddess, and that's how it should have been. And I bought 4 pairs of boots from him. And there was more ladies walking past going, "They sell boots to fit bigger calves." And I was like, "Yes, just look at them." And he's on his knees still zipping me into them, and that's what I wanted. And that's the support as a larger lady or a more mature lady or man you're missing.
Can I give another piece of good news for the people who think they're big? Because everybody's heard that, you got to fit in with the whole hand behind you and all these kind of things. In reality, if you're balanced in the saddle and you're up, you're gonna be focusing a lot more weight through the middle of your body and down into your thighs. So you're not actually gonna be sitting on that soft part of your bum. So I used to meet before I even started this was people who would look like they had a big bum, and they said, "Oh, I've been given this big saddle." They're giving them an 18-inch, and they were sliding around. So I would just be open-minded and I said, "Okay, if you feel like you're sliding around, I'll try you in a smaller saddle." At that time, I had not started measuring people yet, but they would go, "Oh, now I sit really stabilized. Great." And as we started to measure people, we found that a lot of the time, because like Bradley say, you pull the saddle out in the middle as you make it bigger. That basically means that you're making the waist, the waist longer.
Yep.
And on a majority of ladies, that means that now their seat bones are on each side of the twist in the waist. So now you are unbalanced, going from side to side or sliding or having to press yourself backwards for your seat bones to hit anything to sit on. So you can go down in size to actually fit your pelvis. Somebody may complain about your butt in the rear. It doesn't make a difference. We tried this with the weight, where the pressure goes is where it's centered. So it doesn't matter. And the thing is, when you're stabilized in a position where you actually have something underneath your seat bones, you're not going to wobble from side to side. And you're not going to be rolling forward or backwards. So you're going to be a better load for your horse because you're not going to be rocking.
Yeah.
So if we come back to the curves that Brad made about, where the panels on the tree hits the horse, if you're going from side to side too much, you're going to be putting so much compression on the outside of that tree edge and the panel edge that you're going to be causing problems. If you're going back and forwards, the horse is not going to really know if you're coming or going because you have 2 points of gravity that you're shifting all the time. And that's going to make the horse go down in the front. So even if you think that you're big, look for a saddle that will stabilize you and give you support.
Yeah.
Because that's going to make you a lighter ride, a more balanced ride.
Yeah.
And it's going to make it possible for you to access your core. Because one of the things that we have found is that if you roll backwards in the seat and your pelvis is tilted, you can access your core muscle.
Yeah, your core just
stabilize yourself.
It's not engaged, is it? Yeah.
No, it's not engaged. So there is a lot of misconception about having to go really big because you're a bit overweight. So the restriction you have is go away from high cantle. Yeah. High cantle is gonna make that rear part of the saddle lift your bum up and push you forward. So stay with an open seat. Stay with probably an adjustable knee block so you can get something really short so you get better room. Then you can stick a small jumping block on there to get better leg room. Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do in a smaller saddle. And the thing we find is that once you put somebody in neutral, they look smaller.
Yes. Yeah.
And their leg isn't going forward anymore. So they're, just try to find your inner self even when you're looking for a saddle.
Yeah.
You don't need to focus on so much on what you seem to be.
Yeah.
Yep, stability is key, and that helps with synchrony. So
the one thing we haven't included in all of this, in terms of rider weight and obviously how it affects the saddle's design and everything like that, is girthing. I'm just saying that because obviously in case anybody turns around and kind of goes, oh, well, they haven't talked about girthing and girthing straps, because that does have an impact upon panel performance and everything like that. We can talk about that, but that is a whole nother thing in a whole separate thing.
And I have a whole load more information about girthing for a larger lady and sensitive horses, and I really struggled with my.
So girthing is a larger subject, which not necessarily you want to go into now, because it's because that has an influence and an impact on the panel performance. Because obviously, if you're pre-tightening a girth, then you're squashing the panel, which means that the performance of the materials within the panel. So we, just for clarity's sake, we can talk about it. It is something which we have all can talk about in private, but we're not presenting it here today because that is another lecture in and upon itself.
So we have got more to talk about. There will be more summits. We are aiming towards more saddle construction and design. So I want to know about flexible versus treed. I want to know about Western versus English. We want to know about girths. There's more we can do on rider stability. And there's 2 comments here, which I've been trying to get to for a while. The consumers need to understand and want the ethical side of things. As one fitter can be ethical, but the consumer demands a saddle, so goes elsewhere for it. So yeah, I mean, as saddle fitters, we need the support and recognition of riders that it's not about I want a saddle, therefore who's going to supply it. There needs to be more accountability, which we have touched on. And this was super interesting. Thank you again. And I will say a gold rosette for each of you, because you have retained your audience again over 2.5 hours. There was one who dropped in and out, but let's blame that on the signal in some country elsewhere or up in the
Or maybe
mountains.
their whole life situation. Sometimes you have to come and go.
So huge well done for audience retention.
I sincerely apologise for it being quite heavy loaded at the beginning, because there's quite a lot of science and everything like that. So I just wanted to try and get that out of the way as much as possible, because I can talk about it in more detail, but it's very complicated. So I was trying to give it as much, trying to keep it light and as easy to understand. So I apologise.
They can go back and replay and stop,
Yeah,
start.
exactly.
You.
Yeah.
So just as a very brief summary, the blue sky strategy here is for the horse and rider need to be fit to ride and be ridden. That's a given.
Yeah.
And manufacturers need to provide products that are fit to be ridden in. I think that's where it's going wrong. So, and I think the take-home message, given that this is rider weight, is self-care. There has to be some beginning of self-care before you can make any change.
Yeah,
So,
you need a team, and you need help to find, that first thread, just to to get going and start to look at yourself, because women we just tend to try to do too much.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and if anybody's really struggling and they're just about to jump off a cliff, they can message me and I'll try and help them.
Yeah, great.
Brilliant. Okay, and another message. Excellent again. So yeah, well, that was the bigger picture. I'm sure we could even have made another one out of this, but we'll put our heads together and decide what the next summit will be. And again, I'll send you the replay link and some links you can click on to access our pages and the YouTube channel. So, and I will get some snippets of this rider weight out so that you can share those. But it's so difficult to select what to take out as a clip when you've all been so amazing. That sounds a little bit like I'm creeping, but it's very difficult to edit this down to a few clips, but I'll try.
Thank you.
Well, thanks a million, all of you, and thanks to the audience for hanging in there. And we're super pleased that you have hung in there for this time. We're obviously doing something right and hitting the spot. So I'll say good night now. And we'll see you next time. Oh, amazing, super informative. Very many thanks to you all for giving up your time to educate us. Need I say more?
Welcome.
Yes, our pleasure. So good night, audience.